Hey everybody, this is just a quick introductory note to say that during this episode, toward the back half, I believe, I talk with Alice a little bit about the Bhagavad Gita and specifically about, I mention Amit Majumdar's translation of the Bhagavad Gita, which is called God Song. It's a little bit confusing the way I talk about it. I have not actually read Majumdar's translation, but I have ordered it, and I do plan to now. I've read a different translation a couple of times, but I just wanted to say here that I think it's a worthwhile brief conversation. But since recording this, I recorded an episode with Majumdar himself on a different topic, and the Bhagavad Gita came up, and he completely fucking changed my understanding of the poem. Like, it just totally reoriented my sense of what's going on in it. So. It was really exciting to me to learn that, and I am eager to release that episode so you can hear. But I just wanted to mention it because it happened to come up in this earlier episode, and I would probably talk about it in a very different way if I were to record this conversation today. But in any case, this is going to be kind of a long one. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and might get me in even more trouble than usual. Anyway, let's get to the show right now.
Who is Amy Hempel?
Oh, Amy Hempel? She's an American short story writer. She's great.
Oh,
her
okay.
Probably her best known story is still her first, which is called The Cemetery Where Al Jolson is Buried. Well, she writes very low. They're low in plot, but they tend to be like almost ditzy, plotless meanderings that like you gradually figure out happened immediately in the wake of horrifying tragedy.
That sounds great.
But I think she has like maybe the very best dialogue of any fiction writer writing today. And I have a theory I have a theory that every single bit of dialogue in her stories is something she has actually overheard someone say. I kind of suspect she's like a top level eavesdropper and just like perfectly, because like even good novelists that I enjoy, often their dialogue is a little like, well, you're kind of stitching things together here, but hers is just like pitch perfect.
Awesome. Ooh. Good to know. How are you?
Fucking exhausted.
You're a tired man.
Yeah.
Every single time I ask you how you are, you're just like, I'm exhausted.
Kids and dog, man. I was just in very manly fashion reading my daughters some bedtime stories, so I had to wrap that up. One of which was the story that drives me fucking crazy. Have you ever heard of it's apparently a beloved classic. It's called The Rainbow Fish by Marcus Pfister.
Yeah, maybe.
It reads like if like Jesse Waters, like a Fox News correspondent, wrote a parody Marxist children's book, it would be this. It's like, whose planet? Like, is this even what? Like, the whole premise is this fish. This fish is very beautiful because it has all these beautiful, multicolored, shining scales, and then one of the fish, a little sad drab fish, comes up to it and says, "Give me one of your scales," which is like one of his body parts. And then he says, "No, I don't want to give you my scale." And then all of the other fish shun him. And then a wise octopus tells him he has to tear off all of his scales and give them away. And then he tears off all of his scales except for one, and he gives them all to different fish. And then they all have one scale each. And they're all equally drab except for one little scale. And then they go off and they can be friends. And like the other fish accept him now. The end. What the fuck is that about? Like, it's like, that's not even like, it truly is like if Marxism were designed to fix to dissolve the existence of personal property instead of private property. It was like, no one is allowed to have tchotchkes anymore. You must redistribute the tchotchkes. Like, is that a nicely chosen belt that you have to complete your ensemble? No, cut it in half and give it away to your neighbors. It's just like what is that about? It's like clearly teaching a lesson, but like, what lesson?
What lesson do you think your daughter gets from it?
I don't know. I don't know what it could possibly be teaching her, but she's certainly not learned to share. I'm Matthew Buckley Smith, and you're listening to Slee Rickets. Thank you all for listening, and thank you especially to those of you who have recommended the show to somebody you think might like it. That makes all the difference in the world. Thanks also to everybody who subscribed to the Slee Rickets Secret Show. You can get a bunch of extra episodes, you can get free stickers, and you can get the joy of knowing that you're helping this show continue to exist. So do go to sleerickets.substack.com if you have not yet. I am grateful. This week I have I'm very bad at predicting what will offend people, but let me just say that for all those of you who were not at all offended by the rabbit hole episodes, there's at least a good chance I'm really going to piss you off in this one. I think in this case, I don't think anyone will be mad at Alice, but I think a few people might be mad at me. We talked about gender and sexuality in poetry specifically. The other topic we had that we were going to separate from was self-loathing. Why do poets hate themselves? But then the two ended up being so inextricable that I left them all together here. So I have cut a couple of shorter segments that are maybe the most problematic material, and that will appear on the Secret Show feed. But for now, here is Alice. Alice and me talking about masculinity and femininity. Oh, and at some point we mentioned this term heteropessimism, which is a weird neologism. I will include a link to an article about it, but it's basically straight women despairing of their straightness. All right, so we'll get to that, and if you want to hear the rest of this conversation, then you can go again to sleeprickets.substack.com.
So you forwarded me this email looking at this question of why we found poetry to be so embarrassing, supposedly, off the back of the AMA episode on The Secret Show. And I found this poem by a guy called James Lachlan, who I'd never heard of, but who ended up founding New Directions with his family money, which is basically directly about this. So I thought maybe you could read that to kick us off.
James McLaughlin, this was published in Poetry in May of 1992. This is called The Shameful Profession by James Lachlan. For years, I tried to conceal from the villagers that I wrote poetry. I didn't want them to know that I was an oddball. I didn't want the young men with beards wearing baseball caps who come to the liquor store in their pickups to buy six-packs to know that I was some kind of sissy. I decided it was prudent to buy the Daily News instead of the Times at the drugstore. I burned my poem drafts at home before I took the trash to the dump. Kids scavenge around there, and the old man who does the recycling is nosy. I took every precaution. But our town is not an easy place to keep secrets. Everybody knows everybody, and they gossip when they're getting their mail at the post office. Things began to come apart. A young man with long hair and a city accent showed up and asked in the stores where the poet Lachlan lived. Then a pipe burst, and the plumber told people that he saw thousands of books stacked in the cellar, some of them in foreign languages. Next day, the head of the volunteer fire department came, pretending to check the wiring. I began to get a bit paranoid. The town trooper is supposed to check each rural road once a week, but he came up our road past my house 3 days in succession. The axe fell when somehow a reporter for the county paper heard the rumors, and there was a little item. Local poet caught speeding twice on 272. Motor vehicles may suspend license. Much has changed in my life now. Nobody has laughed at me in the street. I'm over 6 feet, weigh 245, and look pretty fit for my age. But they look at me in a funny way. I don't go to Apple House, our grocery store, anymore, because a little girl with her finger in her nose pointed me out to the checkout lady and asked her something. Now I get my liquor and supplies in the next towns, and order honey-baked hams from Virginia by mail. My life is all different now that they know I write poems. But if they think they can shame me out of it, they're very much mistaken. I'm not breaking any law. I'll go on with it unless they have me declared a public nuisance and have me sent to the Institute. I've heard there is a poor old fellow in the Institute who claims he is Henry Wordsworth Longfellow. He'll understand and be my friend. We can recite to each other if they won't let us have paper and pencils. I only just noticed that it was Wordsworth instead of Wadsworth.
Yeah, that is
I don't know
weird.
if that's, it's presumably a joke because it's a crazy guy. I don't know.
Not the world's best poem, but
No.
I found it endearing.
Yeah. Also, 245 at 6 foot, like, that's, if you look fit, like, if you don't, I feel like you don't look pretty fit at 245 and 6, like, that's, you have to be, like, fucking jacked. Like, you have to be a bodybuilder, 245 and 6 foot tall. Like, that, because you could look perfectly normal at 245. But, like, if you look pretty fit, you probably look like a fucking beast. That's like for a guy in 19, I guess gay culture was more into like body shaping than straight culture back then. But like, boy,
Oh, so
that guy
read
worked
this?
out is all I'm saying. He worked out.
Right. Do you read this as a gay poem? Because I did at first, but James Lachlan isn't gay.
He's not? I thought he was.
I know, right? This is gayer
Oh,
than Christmas, but
I
it's
thought he was
not.
gay.
Nah.
Because even the way he says it, he's like, I didn't, what did he say? Because he says, I didn't want them to know that I was some kind of sissy. Like, rather than I didn't want them to think I was some kind of sissy. Some kind of sissy is like a weird phrasing anyway. And obviously sissy is a derogatory term, but like, it is a little odd, I would think, for us if he was straight. Huh.
Yeah, it totally reads like he's talking about being gay in a small town, not talking about being a poet in
Yeah.
a small town.
Right.
But he had a bunch of wives. I mean, that's not to say that he couldn't have had other stuff going on. But
Okay. Huh.
yeah, confusing poem.
Yeah.
But I thought it got a little bit at the question, and I wanted to ask you
Yeah.
if you feel like writing poetry is something that you have to hide from people.
It's not something I hide, but it's definitely not something I advertise.
Fair.
Like, it's definitely not something I advertise. And like, if for like because of some personal connection, somebody at a party says like, "Oh, are you a poet?" Or like, "I heard you were a poet." I typically cringe away from that and sort of joke it off and try not to talk more about it. It did seem like I am a little bit bad. Like, I think this poem makes a lot more sense if it is an allegory.
Right? Yeah. So
Like,
weird.
I get being embarrassed by poetry, but it seems like this particular way of framing it, as well as like calling it the shameful profession. Like, I don't know, maybe in 1992, but like, what? Like, is it a profession? Like, I don't know. I know very few people for whom it's honest to God a profession anymore.
Yeah, it's either a really weird poem about being ashamed and worried about being a poet, or it's a great poem about being gay in a small town.
Yeah.
Well, great is overstating it. Like it's
Right.
a solid
Yeah.
poem about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like this flavor of embarrassment seems strange to me. Because the other part of it that makes this all not ring true with regard to poetry is that like, people don't fucking care. Like
Absolutely.
people aren't out to like find out the poets. Like people do have prurient curiosity, especially back before it was socially acceptable about like, oh, is he gay or not? Like that is something people would gossip about. Who would ever care if not to have something to talk about at a party or a barbecue about whether someone was a poet or not? Like
Yeah.
it's just
And
something embarrassing. It's just like something you try to do that you don't really want to. Like I think it's not that poetry in itself is shameful or embarrassing. It's that bad poetry is shameful or embarrassing, and almost all poetry is bad poetry, and almost everyone who says I'm a poet or I write poetry writes bad poetry. And most people aren't especially interested in finding out the difference. And so it's sort of like that evolutionary tick where like we like biologists think that we developed just a reflexive disgust and avoidance of anything that squirmed on the ground, because like if you flinch away from like a big earthworm and it then like no harm no foul, but if you don't flinch away from like a black mamba, you're fucked. So
Yeah.
we just go ahead and we say like, well, let's just assume all squirmy things on the ground are venomous snakes. And you're like, let's just assume anybody you hear about in your life and not on the news, who's, well, if there's someone on the news, it's usually something horrible in a different way. But like anybody you hear about in your life who says like, who has like poet attached to his name, it's a safe bet that that's going to be bad poetry. And so I think like that's what like I at least definitely don't want to be associated with in people's minds, which is why I don't like, you don't need to actively hide it, but you definitely don't go out of your way to own it.
Yeah, I want to disagree with you, but I can think of, too many examples of people who, in their Twitter bio or their little Facebook bio say, you know, John Smith, poet, and that
Deadly,
stuff's
deadly.
not good. Yeah. Donald Hall said a nice thing about James Lachlan. Oh, I thought it was a useful quote. Perhaps if the poet pretends that he does not take his work seriously, he is free to continue it. I thought that was kind of a bit of a gentler way of saying what you're saying, maybe.
Yeah. How do you read free?
I don't know. Actually, when I think about it, it's more free from himself, free from his own expectations. And that's what I think is behind this whole question and issue is the question, who do you think you are to be going around writing poetry or writing what you think is poetry and calling yourself a poet? And if you're free from that expectation of yourself and from that kind of, from advertising yourself in that way, then you can sneak around the back and write some poems.
There's a rant in, or a riff or whatever in Nick Hornby's book about a boy I remember reading in college, and the main character who's a just like classic piece of shit, just like great piece of shit character, totally worthless, but he is sort of on a sort of date with this woman who has a young son, and like he's wanting it to be a date, and I think she's not necessarily, but she offers to for them to sing for him, and he says sure, why not, and then she plays a song on the piano, and she and her son both sing a song with their eyes closed.
Joni
And
Mitchell, I think. Yeah.
oh, do you remember it?
Yeah, I just read it recently. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. So do you remember the riff about singing with your eyes closed?
No, not precisely, no.
Well, it's specifically like most people are not good singers, but if you sing with your eyes closed in company, that's like almost 100% of the time just deadly, deadly. Like it's, you can't help but be just cripplingly embarrassed for the other person. And I think like he even makes some allowance for like if you are a true genius and you sing with your eye, like maybe then we just like to the point where we say like, oh God, I'm so glad his eyes are closed, because if his eyes were open, I would just like dissolve into tears on the floor because it's so beautiful. But at least if you sing in a mediocre way with your eyes open, like at karaoke, you're kind of in communication with the other people also perceiving it. But if your eyes are closed, you're having an experience. It's like a powerful emotional experience. And if the other people listening to you are not having a powerful emotional experience, then they can't help but just die with embarrassment for you. And it feels a little bit like with Lachlan or with some poets, maybe what Hall, like part of what Hall's getting at is like, don't sing with your eyes closed if you're going to be a poet. Like, let other people know you're in on the joke of how silly this is.
Right. So are you embarrassed to be a poet then?
Yeah, I mean, I maybe this is a case where I do kind of come back to Brian's question about in front of whom, like in what company. Because if it's just among other people who write poetry, I can speak in like casual social terms, or even in like casual, nerdy, jargony terms, right? And if it's even among like anybody else who makes or does art or is involved in the arts, then it can still be, they can still have a degree of like shop talk about it, right? But with whom would I want it brought up that I write poetry who is not like a reader of my, like, who, like if it was someone who had somehow read a poem of mine, that would be like flattering and embarrassing in a different way. But like, what is the conversation in which I would want people, like I would want to be talking with somebody about the fact that I write poetry that wasn't like a shop talk conversation? Like, I can't imagine what that would be where it wouldn't be horrifying. Like, because it also, like, I couldn't help but imagine the whole time the other person trying desperately to keep a straight face and like, or like act interested.
Act
So
interested.
I can't conceive of what that would be.
Yeah, well, talking with family is where it comes up the most, and I think you talked about this in an early episode about going home and people asking you how things were going with how's it going with the book. We'll see, kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I have
Okay.
a lot of artists in my family, so some of that is a little bit alleviated by that. But what about you? So you've mentioned in the past that you have like a particular unease about poetry around your family. Is that,
Yeah.
what does that look like, or what does that feel like?
My dad is a writer and an academic, but he is kind of on a. I can't really follow him where he goes in his thinking. He doesn't hold forth and
Right.
explain it to me. He's just like kind of off in his own world, thinking about big, difficult topics to do with art
Right.
and the nature of art. We have really good conversations where he asks me about my work, but I think when he read my book, he was a bit. He certainly didn't ring me and say like, "My daughter's a genius," and but and my mum, my mum didn't finish high school. There's not really any books at mum's house, but the two books that there are my two books, which is
Wow.
it's sort of heartbreaking to me because I can remember having a conversation with her very early on about one of the first poems I got published that was about her, and I showed it to her, and she just said, "I don't understand it, darling." Yeah, so that's mum and dad, and then my older brother and sister, and probably to a large extent my little brother. Like I think just see that side of me as sort of it's like a weird habit, illness, tendency, something that I have to do that they will sort of look at from afar and go, well, I suppose she has to do that.
Like Alice collects rare bottle caps.
Totally, totally. That's what I'm going for. This is probably all a little bit like meaner than it actually is. Like they all are interested to hear how it's going, but you just can't talk about it, right? Because how it's going is usually pretty fucking terrible. But you can't sort of sit down with your brother and be like, well, I don't know if I'll ever write a good poem again. I feel completely paralyzed.
Yeah.
Like you can't really be honest about it. And so it becomes, you end up giving this really curtailed version of what's going on that's not very honest. And then the conversation just moves on to something that you can actually talk about. So I suppose it's not embarrassment or shame so much as like, I don't want to bother them with my strange addiction.
So is that true for you of any topic?
No, I'm happy to, like,
Like
I can,
surely there are other topics they don't particularly know about, but that are relevant to you and your well-being, and they would be happy to talk with you about them because they concern you. So
yeah, yeah, like,
is this particular in that?
I think so. Yeah, like I could talk about my day job with them easy
which
because
also doesn't interest them on its own.
no,
But
no.
because of you, they like want to hear and think about it. And
Yeah, that's right. It's just the lack of reference points, I think. And
is it
yeah,
because so day jobs or like an office job or a day job, like that's something even if they don't know about it in particular, it's not hard for them to get their arms around the idea of it.
totally.
Whereas with
Mm.
poetry, you maybe need a little more context. But is part of it also that as brilliant and skillful and accomplished as I'm sure you are at your day job, you don't like if you won the lottery, you wouldn't be sad to move on from that. But if you, I don't know, maybe the lottery is different in Australia. I don't know. Do they stone you to death if you win the lottery over there?
Yeah, they stone
Okay,
you to
right,
death.
yeah. So not that lottery. But like you presumably like you don't care about your day job on this in the same way that you care about your poetry. Is
I
that
don't
part
think I
of
care
it?
about anything in the same way that I care about my poetry, and
Okay, so
that's
but then
that.
right then
Yeah,
that's part like not only do they not know how to talk about it or think about it, and not only do they not care about it except for you, but like you care about it so fucking much that it's
that
almost
it's
impossible to.
embarrassing. Yeah.
Do you think it would be? Because I wonder. Because I do. I mean, I have had friends who are religious talk to me about how alienating it is to be around mostly secular people in a
Mm,
mostly
mm.
secular culture when they have a gut, which like to the outside is like a a deep emotional and practical and logistical devotion to something that to most people around them is either non-existent or meaningless.
Yeah, I think it's really similar to that. Hey, like, how could you express how important it is? They can't when they can't understand. My words are failing me here, but this is what these conversations are like, I suppose. Yeah, well, but you don't. It doesn't seem like you feel that way. It seems like you've got a pretty good. You can talk to your dad at least about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean he's an art major and he paints now that he's retired. I mean, he was an architect, which is the most practical. It's like the highest intersection of like practical professional work and art at the same time. You know, like it's
Mm.
other than like I guess like filmmaker if you happen to be there, but like in a kind of in a sort of like normal way, you can be like a professional artist sort of and be an architect. Yeah, and he like cares a lot about art. And my brother is an artist, and I'd certainly talked to him a fair amount about it. And my sister, my mom, both have like an interest in the arts and just have been used to dealing with the rest of us. So yeah, like that's not impossible, but there is. I do have a little bit of trouble, even among other poets, honestly,
Oh, really?
about the importance of it.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
And part of that
I mean,
is
I
like a
was kind of,
self-deprecation thing. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was worried yesterday because I was kind of making fun of you on WhatsApp.
That's fine. Yeah, yeah.
Just like quoting you back to yourself in this episode that you did with Cameron, where you guys just got so fucking nerdy. And like, I hope it's obvious that it's done with like
Oh,
this
please.
sense
Yeah,
of
yeah,
like,
yeah.
I could never follow you into that territory. Like, you would be horrified to know how much I use Google just to talk to you. But
I had
but
to Google
yeah,
heteropessimism. I had to do a little homework on your
I hadn't
conversation
heard
with
that word
Ursula
till three
Shaw.
weeks ago. Yeah, yeah. But yeah, do you feel like you are, I don't know, further down the path, like more committed than most of the poets you speak to?
No, but I do feel as if they are have a healthy, like most poets I know, have a healthier attitude toward it. Like
Healthier.
a joke poets like to make with each other is some variation of, oh, we're just writing garbage and none of this is going to matter anyway. Nobody's going to read it, and it's none of this is real poetry. We can read the real poets and look at their work and think about like the real poetry that matters, and we're just dicking around. Some variation on that. I know that was a very poorly executed joke, but probably because the line, the Kierkegaard has a great line that you can tell what someone's in denial about when everybody else in the room is laughing and a chill runs down his spine. And it's not that I think my poetry is actually great. It's that when I think about that, like, oh, probably everything I'm writing is garbage and failed and meaningless. For me, the necessary next step is like, and so I should shoot myself. How could you like actually think that like you have no hope of writing anything meaningful and devote yourself to poetry? Like, you have to believe that it's at least possible for you to write
What
something that counts, that matters, that lands. If not, it's like there's the yawning maw of chaos and despair. Like otherwise, like yeah, like the stakes are high, man. You
but
know?
that's why it's a bit like religious devotion, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Right. Yeah. Do you know where you will spend the afterlife? Yeah. Do you know where you will
So
spend posterity? Right.
so I want to try to bring in all this masculinity, femininity stuff too. So does
Yeah.
any does being a poet diminish your sense of yourself as masculine?
Not really, but I also have a particular. I am very enthralled to traditional notions of masculinity, not because I consciously verbally endorse them or think that they're good, but they just are the case. And like they're just stitched into my sense of what I ought to be. And I'm total, like, the primary ways in which I excel in satisfying masculine stereotypes, and like, I'm tall, I have like a prominent jaw and brow, and I have a deep voice, all 100% the product of a pituitary tumor. Like they're not, like, none of those are actually even like genetically the case. Like, which is to say, like, were I to have fathered any boys, I would like be passing along like small Irishman genes. Like, it wouldn't be like, none of this is actually in my coding. So I feel very implicated by like every masculine stereotype. Like, I feel as if I ought to be living up to these. But one oddly, like one, I guess, like traditional Western standard, though I guess you have to go like post Greece, that has never really bothered me. I mean, since maybe middle school, is the straight gay thing. Like, that
How do
is
you mean?
not, like, I talked to a guy friend recently who's like very traditionally masculine guy in a number of respects, and I just asked him about like what he thought about what it meant to be a man or what it felt like to be a man or growing up. And for him, the first thing he listed was like, in his dress and in his presentation, it was very important that he not appear gay. Like, that
Oh,
was,
okay, but
again, like, not his con. He's like a thoughtful liberal guy, but like what he felt growing up. Like, it was important not to seem gay, and that is not. I mean, I did a lot of theater stuff. I grew up in Atlanta with like, so it was like a very vibrant gay culture, but that has never really been part of the bargain for me. And if anything, like, I have been told at different times that I seem gay or like dress gay. Like, that has not ever bothered me one way or another. So like, even James Laughlin saying like, I didn't want them to think I was some kind of sissy. That just like, it's hard for me to compute that. Like, I don't know. It just doesn't seem. I also, and this is maybe a topic for another time or for no time, but but I am a little bit curious because I definitely think like on the. I mean, Kinsey, who knows what any of that adds up to, but like he at least introduced this notion that sexuality is a spectrum, and that most people don't fall at either hard extreme, and that maybe there's some even fluidity within one's life, and maybe that fluidity is more for women than men and whatever. But like, I definitely am not like a hard 100% straight guy. I mean, I am like not that interested in seeing naked dudes, but like, without saying like a horrible slur that's been used in horrible ways for a long time, like, for most of my life, well into my early 20s, people called me FAG or some
right.
variation on that, like, all the time, even like with affection. So like I am married to a woman. I don't plan on shaking that up anytime soon. But, you know, like in some cosmic sense, am I like, you know, where would I locate myself in some like matrix of sexuality? I don't know, man. But I also kind of feel like, well, who cares? Like, definitely who cares what like some bearded white 40-year-old married guy like could theoretically think sexually. Like, what does it fucking matter? But I do know that for a number of especially like married female artists, that there have been like essays and things that have come out about like, well, it's important for me to acknowledge that I'm queer. I think for a while it was bisexual, and now I think queer is now the kind of the broader term. And you've even made comments about like, oh, like marriage seems too hetero, or like like I don't like you know, like I remember listening to the podcast early on. I'm just very like dumb and literal minded about this stuff. And so the first several episodes of Poetry Says I listened to, I was like, oh, Alice is an Australian lesbian. And then I was like, oh, she's with Tom. And it was like, oh, Tom is a trans man. Like it's just like that was my like I was like of like statistical possibilities. I was like, yes, Occam's razor states this is like relatively unconventional arrangement is the most likely explanation. But like it does seem to have some meaning for you, whether or not you ever sleep with, you know, like not to get into your marriage or not your non-marriage, your business, but like does that matter? I don't
Does what
know.
matter?
It
Is it
like
the label?
does like theoretical, like I made a joke about being a non-practicing incel, but like being like a non-practicing queer person, like is that a meaningful thing?
Yeah, I don't really know what direction to go in with this.
Or is just heterosexuality is so mortifying that like any distance you can put.
Yeah, no, it's not. That's not it for me. So, I was, I grew up in the '90s. I was a teenager in the '90s, and I was very, very much in love with my best friend, whose name is also Alice. And I came out to all my friends as a lesbian before I was, I don't know, when I was like 14, 15. Yeah, and so, and then I went overseas and traveled for a bit. Um, and yeah, without sort of telling other people's stories. Yeah, when I met Tom, it was very, very inconvenient that he was a
Yeah,
guy.
yeah, yeah.
At the time, he had beautiful, like long blonde hair, and convinced me that he was very into Ani DeFranco. So I was like, oh, this will be fine.
She had a similar experience, didn't she? Where she like fell in love
Yeah,
with a guy
vaguely.
and was sort of wrote Dilate, and then was sort of like, well, I didn't mean to have a
Yeah.
heterosexual streak, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, so far my heterosexual streak has lasted for 20 years. So I'm a fairly unconvincing lesbian at this point. I mean, the most I think I could probably describe myself as, like, practically speaking, is as an ally. But
right,
I know that I feel the same as I did when I was 8 years old, which is
right,
like the way that I feel about men and women and people in general is the same now as it was then. But my life looks extremely straight. So
yeah, yeah,
that's probably where you get the impression that.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I was hanging out with a friend of mine last night who's just like, our joke is that we'll both leave our respective partners and go off and be late in life lesbians eventually, and she's just always telling me how gay I am. So that's all in play to some degree, but I feel like I would be taking up space that's really not mine if I was wandering around being like, queer poet Alice
Right, yeah,
Allen.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
no.
Yeah, but like
I,
it's
I,
been
I
a
enjoy all the privileges of like passing straight.
sure. Yeah,
And
like,
yeah.
but like that's a pretty good answer. Like because it's been a really big, important part of your emotional and social life. Like it's part of who you are for that, like very convincing reason. I
Yeah,
think
but
some of
sort
the
of,
yeah the like and then I think some of the essays that might like Joanna and I had seen where it was partly like women who had not previously come out or not like so that maybe they were sort of needing to come to terms with something that hadn't had room to breathe before their marriages.
and it is like, just coming back to the Lachlan poem, it is a little bit like being a poet, because it's like most days I'm not a poet, Most
Right. Yeah.
days
Yeah. Yeah.
I go and send emails in an office, and I do laundry, and I make a podcast, and I talk to my friends. Um, I'm not a poet most of the time. And I suppose, like, practically speaking, I'm gay like 0% of the time these days.
Right. Yeah. 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 And it's
But
some
it's, yeah.
stand-up comic made the point that like if you're a straight woman, it means that you're attracted to like an extremely small slice of men. like that it means like most men you find repulsive until
Yeah, yeah,
but then
yeah.
there's like this small set of exceptions, right?
Which gets into this heteropessimism stuff that I talked to Ursula about. And I don't think either of us were ready to talk about it. I certainly didn't have a fully formed idea on it, but I thought it was very useful, the idea that, like, a lot of women who are in relationships with men spend just an inordinate amount of time complaining about just how terrible men are. And there's a really wonderful YouTuber, Natalie Wynn, aka ContraPoints, who has a great video about this. And she just talks about, like, what's up with straight women? Like, they just hate men. Are they okay? Yeah.
Is that some is so? I asked you on WhatsApp, is heteropessimism just ironic misandry rebranded and or without the irony? And you replied, "Let's find out," which immediately preceded our conversation. But I also wonder, like, is it just like the old fashioned battle of the sexes? Like, is it just like when you are like one of the advantages or disadvantages of heterosexuality is that you're sleeping with someone who's belongs to a group of which you're not a member. Like if it's all men sleeping together or all women sleeping together, it's harder to complain about the other set because you're also part of that set. But if you're sleeping with people who don't belong to your group, then like it seems natural to make generalizations about them, like fairly, unfairly, sloppily, cautiously, whatever. Like particularly if your friends are mostly of your sex and they also are straight, then like why wouldn't you get together with the ladies and gripe about men? But like why, like men do that too with about women, only at least outside of certain gloomy right-wing portions of the internet, it's so frowned upon that liberal or leftist men mostly keep it offline, I think. Like, isn't that just a normal, natural thing to do?
Yeah, I think it's like a pressure release, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. There's
So,
such a huge gulf, I think, between men and women to get like super binary about it. That I think it's really normal to just feel like so many of my conversations with my girlfriends are just like, I just don't understand, like, what is he doing? What does he want? I don't understand him. And all I can say is, I don't understand him either, but you're great and don't worry.
yeah. Did you
know,
read
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
The Lauren Groff novel Fates and Furies, did you read that?
No, I didn't. No.
It's pretty good. Like I enjoyed it. I find her to be an engrossing fiction writer. It was, the first half was all from it was the story of a marriage told from the perspective, or not, sort of the close third perspective of the man, and the second half was from the perspective of the woman. And they didn't exactly take place during the same time period, but they kind of covered a lot of the same events. And the gimmick or premise of, well, I guess that was the gimmick. The premise of a lot of it was that much of what he thought was happening was not what was happening. And like, she had a really big dark secret where she had done a really horrible thing in the past that he did not know about. And B, she was the shoemaker's elves doing all the work to support his dazzling career. and had kind of
Okay.
made all these arrangements behind his back in order to let him be the star he was. And that was fine. But the thing that did sort of surprise me about it, that just seemed like surely those kind of relationships do exist. I don't know if that's like quite as much the norm as like meme world would have one think, but like surely that kind of thing happens. But also, it just seems strange to me, like, oh, so there was nothing that he knew about that she didn't know about. Like there was no, like, there wasn't. It wasn't even that like he knew about any of her secrets. Like he had no perspective. Like her perspective, 100% contained his perspective.
Yeah, like this idea that men are so simple.
Right.
They have almost no inner life, and the inner life they do have, we can just basically figure out through inference.
Yeah.
And these conversations I have with my girlfriends often run along the lines of like, either, option A, he's totally evil and fucking with you on a level that is like just like totally unforgivable,
Right.
or he's just not thinking about you,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and and it's not personal, and there's nothing going on there. And I generally sort of, because I have like, I feel lucky that I have a lot of like male friends and female friends. And when I speak to my guy friends, they're just so often like their minds are just not on the same stuff.
Right.
And yeah, it's not simplicity so much as like they're just thinking about other things, a different set of things.
Yeah. Oh,
So
I think that's probably pretty true. You had asked in an email being whether writing poetry made one less masculine, which it's not especially my experience or feeling, or whether like or whether it made one more feminine. And you did have the Anne Sexton. Do you want to read that? Because
oh
I don't.
yeah,
I just
and
feel sort
sexton.
of baffled by almost all of this.
Oh really?
Yeah, like the
Okay.
relationship. You all see. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so Anne Sexton's poem, The Black Art. A woman who writes feels too much. Those trances and portents. As if cycles and children and islands weren't enough. As if mourners and gossips and vegetables were never enough. She thinks she can warn the stars. A writer is essentially a spy. Dear love, I am that girl. What a mic drop. Ah, so good. She's so bad so much of the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, yeah.
But I think that's just great. Love it.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's the line in The Importance of Being Earnest, where one of the characters says something, and the other one says, "Is that clever?" And the answer is something like, "Well, it's perfectly phrased," and that's that's as much as the same thing. And I do feel a little bit like this is like, well, it's so well done that it has the perfect cadence of like a brilliantly encapsulated experience put into words, but I don't totally know how to put it together.
Oh, okay.
Like a
Well, I
writer
just
is essentially a spy. I think I follow that. I mean, I would say like a writer is essentially a vampire, but because the difference with a spy is like a spy is reporting to a higher power for some greater good, whereas a writer is just sucking blood, just leeching. But yeah, well, like what is this relationship between being a woman and writing?
well, I guess it seems totally clear to me, and this is, I think, going back to the family stuff and the embarrassment stuff. One of the things that I find poetry asks of me is to put it above everything else, to be anywhere near good enough at it
Yeah,
to keep going. And I don't have children. I think, often, like almost constantly, how could this life possibly work if I did? And I know that there'd be women listening who have children and who write poems, and and they're probably, hearing exactly how ridiculous I am. But yeah, this what this poem kind of says to me is like, if you decide that you're going to dabble in this black art, you are essentially saying it's more important than any of that stuff, including the
Yeah.
children. And
That
that's
that makes
an
perfect sense,
awful
and
thing to
that
say.
and that like then the elaboration of as if cycles and children and islands weren't enough, as if mourners and gossips and vegetables were never enough. That all makes good sense in keeping with what you said, and even a writer's essentially a spy. Dear love, I am that girl. That all adds up. I don't know what to do with she thinks she can warn the stars, and the opening is also odd because it seems like a woman who writes feels too much.
That they link together for me. So a woman who writes feels too much, those trances and portents, and then she thinks she can warn the stars. It's like she thinks she's all powerful. She thinks she's so powerful that she should be have access to these tools and be allowed to like wield this power to make things. Why doesn't she just stay home and be satisfied with what she'd be given anyway?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I do get the poem better now. It may be just that it's clues and dog whistles don't set me off quite the same way. So like I'm not primed to read the rest of it the way that I
Mm.
could. But I do
Mm.
like that, and I like the title.
Mm.
Yeah, it's just like it needs to be read by somebody better prepared for it than me, which maybe just means that it's not really a poem for men. I don't know. But I
Well,
do like that.
ancestors.
Like I like your paraphrase of it, and that makes sense to me. Because even
Okay.
like I love my daughters, and I think any I don't know any writer who would say my work is more important than my children. At least no writer who like has an active role in his children's life or in his or children's life. But what's also true is that when someone says, "Well, what do you? Don't worry about what you're going to do with your life. Your accomplishment is your children." Like fuck you. That's totally unsatisfactory. Like it's not even unsat. It's like it's not even that that's not good enough. It's like that's beside the point. That's a set.
Mm.
Like children are maximally important, but there's like that's a separate category, and it doesn't in any way answer this other need, which is also
Mm.
maximally important.
Yeah.
Do children are the children are your real masterpiece as like grounds for summary execution? I think it's totally
Well, but that is the line, isn't it? That just gets bandied around so much.
terrible,
Yeah.
terrible. Yeah, no, yeah. I've been told that before, but I think it's bullshit,
Mm.
and I would like to meet the person who's really satisfied with it. Though, so Coleman is an interesting case because I think it was in an exchange, an email exchange. He because he was the one who early on brought up the question of talking about your family or your loved ones in your poems,
Mm.
and that there is an imposition, if not a violation there. And
Yeah.
I think you and I both said like, oh, I didn't occur to me that you would ask permit like I mean I particularly with the podcast I try to be thoughtful about not like totally exposing my kids in weird ways, but like for with poems, I don't know. If it's gonna make a really good poem, it's hard to say what where you like the thing you don't want to do is humiliate someone in a shitty poem, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
but I think like I said to Coleman something like, well, but I think like finally I just care. It's not that I care more about the poem than I care about the person, but I care more about the poem than I care about decorum, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
And his
Yeah. And
response was
so,
like, well, but part of like, for me, I have to, like, I'm a pastor and I have to think about the well being of my community and I have to think about the role I play and what it means to the. And so I think like that may be a case of like someone who has like a sane, healthy relationship to poetry who says, like, oh no, this is not a demonic god to whom I will sacrifice all things in like in a hope ever to be favored by it, even though it mostly just devours my possessions and ignores me because I actually have a God like that I have a normal relationship with, and so I'm not, it's like maybe that's the answer, and maybe they're surely their parents who similarly have a don't like raise kids while also building a blood shrine in their closets to this evil fake God called poetry.
That is such a perfect way to put it. Oh my God. I don't know. I do feel as if, yeah, if I'm going to be any good at it, it has to be my higher power. And that's not healthy. So I don't know how to
Poetry has
reconcile
to be your
that.
higher power.
Yeah.
So, and you're using AA language there. Yeah. We should say also, like, the other question that got raised in this exchange with the listener was the question of success. That, like, is it shameful to be a poet, or is it shameful to be a poet who doesn't have anything to show for himself? Like, who can't
Yeah.
demonstrate that it matters in any way that he's a poet other than that he says he is, right? Like, if you
Yeah,
have
yeah.
if you have significant accomplishments that are recognized by the larger world, then that's a different story, maybe. But like maybe also related to this whole shame question is like poets' long time relationship with intoxication, as well as with like formal, even like militant sobriety. So what is that? Does like is higher? Was that a happenstantial reference, or I mean, do you also don't feel free not to get into all this if it's like you'd rather not?
I think it's a useful way to phrase it because it suggests
Okay,
like that everything in your life comes second to that. And that is like the success thing is so interesting because it's like how much,
right.
at what point are you, because like when Jess emailed me and said like, oh yeah, well let's do it, let's do your book, I was just like, I'm done, I'm out, yes, it's
Yeah,
like I've solved the problem. And then obviously that fades and then you want the next thing, and then you reach a point like kind of like I'm in now where it's like, well, what are you even doing? Are you doing
right.
anything?
Yeah.
Maybe you should give up.
Right.
That's overstating it. And whenever I say anything like that, I get people messaging me being like, Alice, don't talk that way. It's like, don't worry. Like I'm not giving anything up. But the thought creeps in that there's
Do
a
you
there's a high likelihood I'm wasting my life.
do you get those prompts purely from friends, or from people who have more of a poetry world relationship to you?
Yeah, poetry world relationship, but not like fans or anything. Like not like
Right. No,
anything
no, no.
like
But I mean, like you're those are not like people whose primary connection to you preceded poetry, or
yeah,
was
yeah, yeah.
apart from poetry. That's like people you know mostly through poetry world.
Yeah, yeah. People that I know outside of poetry wouldn't even, I mean, they wouldn't
Okay.
probably even know how to take that statement.
Right. So here's my diabolical question then. Why do you think they say that?
Because if I give up, then they have to give up too.
Is this like
That's
if one couple in a group of friends gets divorced?
isn't that kind of a thing? Yeah. We're gonna reach that stage soon, hey.
Yeah. Oh, I did want to read you this ransom poem that I like, that I suspect you will hate.
Ransom.
So John Crow Ransom, he was the foremost of the fugitives at the time. He's since been eclipsed by Robert Penn Warren. I mean, he was eclipsed eventually by Robert Penn Warren already in his lifetime, but he was pretty sparing about what he published in his lifetime, and I believe stopped publishing at all. A good long while before his death. But he also wrote a fair amount of criticism. I have always had mixed feelings about him because the impression I always have is that he either writes these poems that are sort of too perfect and too tidy and too kind of exquisitely buttoned up, or that sort of tried to be jaunty, playful, sloppy in a way that felt like a stepdad at a sleepover using slang he didn't quite have mastery of. but he has a handful of poems that I can't deny. And this is just a tiny one that's barely a poem even, that I just read and was surprised by and sort of love. It's called Men, and it just leaps into the context of The Tempest, Shakespeare's play, where Miranda, daughter of Prospero, has been stranded with her father on this island, and for her whole life, she was an infant when they left Naples, I think. So for her whole life, she's lived on an island with her father and a bunch of magical spirits, and Caliban, who's of ambiguous species and categorical existence. He's either by some people treated as like just simply a human being who's then derided for his race, and by others as a kind of a something else. But in the context of the play, the supposition is that Miranda has never seen a man, at least not in the way that somebody who, say, is attracted to men would see a man, right? She does meet Ferdinand, who's a handsome and virtuous prince, and he eventually marries her. But this is just when the ship arrives and all of the sailors come up on shore. Mm-hmm. So this is called Men. How many goodly creatures are there here? Miranda doted on the sight of seamen, the very casual adventurers who took a flood as quickly as a calm, and kept their blue eyes blue to any weather. This was the famous manliness of men. And when she saw it on the dirty strangers, she clapped her pretty hands in sudden joy. Oh, brave new world. The end.
Oh, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You thought that would make me mad?
I thought a poem that it used in earnest the phrase "the manliness of men," not derogatorily, would make you mad.
But it's not earnest, is it? It sounds satirical to me.
No, I think it's winking. I think the whole thing is winking, including presumably his use of the word semen. But I think what it seems to capture to me is not the greatness of men, and is not like any special qualities actually inhering in men, but the experience in this teenage girl of beholding this sort of like elemental category and like feeling something and recognizing something for the first time. Like whether or not we know a lot of the sailors were definitely not Horatian models of stoic virtue. Some of them are just downright creeps, but she sort of perceives in them something that she just had never gotten to see before, and it's just exciting and delightful. And it's like, it's such a strangely, it's funny in that like all human experience is sort of small and comical seen from a cosmic scale, but it also just seems like this strange sweet poem about this experience that people have when they kind of come of age in a certain way.
Yeah. Well, sure, but also, I mean, I've only just heard it once, but it's a tiny little moment, snapshot, which I guess suggests what's going to come after. It's going to get worse.
Well, it's going to get, I mean, for her, not really for her though. Like she doesn't, like Caliban threatens to rape her before the play ever begins. We know that. And that's part of why Prospero treats him the way he does. And the soldier, like the sailors and especially the aristocrats get treated, or the nobles get treated to some spooky supernatural tricks by Prospero. And he, makes Ferdinand do a bunch of Sisyphean brute labor involving logs for no reason except to test his mettle. But I don't think there's any like great ugliness that Miranda bears witness to. Like I think
okay.
In the play as well as in the poem, I think like Shakespeare includes every ounce of irony that Ransom could include there. Like, "Oh, brave new world" being both like, and maybe in her mind at that moment, just an expression of wonder and delight, but also, of course, as we use the phrase "brave new world," and as what's his name? Who's the fucking sci-fi writer? Huxley used it later. Like clearly, it also just means a sort of an awe in beholding something beyond our ken. So I think like that's there, but I don't think it's a poem in like if this were Cordelia, at the beginning of Lear, saying like fathers
Yeah.
are the best. You'd be like, woof, man, this is rough. This is going downhill fast. Like, sisters, they stick together. Like whatever, like, that would be terrible. But here I think like because Miranda basically, and like doesn't just have a happy ending, but like basically has a happy play. It's right. Like some people call The Tempest a comedy. Some people call it a romance because it's like there's kind of conflict, but it's not like measure for measure conflict. It's like it's all kind of play pretend. I don't know. I'm
Ransom.
charmed by it, but I'm also charmed
Yeah.
by it in the same way that I was charmed when I heard that when Rosanna Warren met John Crowe Ransom, Robert Penn Warren's daughter, she's depicted in the opening stanza, I believe, of Promises, which won him his second Pulitzer, as a little girl. When she met John Crowe Ransom, she ordered him into her little red wagon, and he obeyed, and she pulled him around the house. He just sat cross-legged and in his suit. I mean, he was always like three-piece suit and tie. And he was famously a very small man, but he was very dapper. But yeah, she
That's
just carted him
gorgeous.
around the house.
I love that. It's so pretty. Oh man. I was talking to Eleanor about this the other day, but like I just wish I had the kind of memory that people like you do. Just like that recall. I cannot do it. I mean, I've had like 3 hours sleep, so
Sure, yeah.
I'm not at my best anyway, but like that is one of my very like shaky, totally unresearched theory is that that is a masculine feminine thing. Like I can remember so much stuff, but it's so useless when it comes to conversations like this. Just like
How do you meet what do
like
you
if you
recall
said
different
who's
things or you
just like names, dates, facts, like unless it's really really important to me, I can't just sort of. I just have so little at my fingertips. Like if you said to me like, "Oh, what's the name of King Lear's daughter?" I'd be like, "Oh, I'll have to go look that up." Even though I know, like I know,
right? Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
but I don't
it's
think
just not
that's. I
there.
actually don't know that that's different at all because I didn't respond with her name to a question. That's what I was reminded of. Whereas when I needed to supply myself with the name of Huxley, I couldn't.
Yeah,
So I
no,
think
I
it's
don't
just a
know.
matter
It's
of following
different.
associations, though. Like I'm not good at trivia.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a weak theory, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's got to be partly just willingness to blather, right?
yeah,
Presumably.
yeah. I think I picked the wrong gig.
I did actually think I read I read the transcript of that, at least part of that conversation about traveling through the dark.
Oh yeah.
It's funny, there's a Mary Hood short story called Manly Conclusions that actually felt relevant to that conversation because and the whole like weight of the story is that it's about a little boy doing what he thinks a man would do, and it's of course the result is horrifying. But you referred to traveling through the dark being where's the line? Yeah, so Kim Stafford, which I guess was his wife or daughter, wife,
Daughter, I think.
daughter.
Yeah.
Okay, she said someone told me it was used at Annapolis to train military officers' difficult decision-making skills. Yeah, how do you make an impossible decision? And they talk a lot about this poem about making an impossible decision, like having to be decisive and make and choose in that moment and have the weight of the world on your shoulders and have to choose one. I had a totally different. Not only did I have a different, like draw different conclusions from the poem, but I also had a totally different set of assumptions about why it was used at Annapolis.
Oh really?
Yeah,
Okay.
but it is. I think. I mean, it's as they say, it's a much overexposed poem, but it's also a great poem. Do you want to read it?
Sure. I only know this poem because we read it so that we could read Armentrout's "Traveling Through the Yard,"
Oh, I don't know that one.
which is a parody.
Is it good?
It's a little bit, yeah. It's. I thought it was funnier the first time. It's a little bit hard to dig out. Okay, shall I read this Stafford
Yeah.
poem now?
Yeah,
Okay.
please.
All right. Travelling through the dark, I found a deer dead on the edge of the Wilson River Road. It is usually best to roll them into the canyon. That road is narrow. To swerve might make more dead. By glow of the taillight, I stumbled back of the car and stood by the heap. A doe, a recent killing. She had stiffened already, almost cold. I dragged her off. She was large in the belly. My fingers touching her side brought me the reason. Her side was warm. Her fawn lay there, waiting, alive, still never to be born. Beside that mountain road, I hesitated. The car aimed ahead its lowered parking lights. Under the hood purred the steady engine. I stood in the glare of the warm exhaust, turning red. Around our group, I could hear the wilderness listen. I thought hard for all of us, my only swerving, then pushed her over the edge into the river. Ugh, I hate it. Hate it.
You hate it?
Yeah.
And I thought hard for us all, at least in my version.
Yeah, sorry. I thought hard for us all. Sorry.
Yeah. No. So you hate this
Do you want me
poem.
to do that again?
No, it's fine. It's fine.
I think it is very self-important. And then listening to the interviews with Stafford's kids, and I think he's in it as well, actually. Oh, no. I watched a YouTube video of him reading it, and he talks about writing it and just about how he had this exact experience and then went home, and the next morning his kids, as they usually did in the morning, asked him what happened last night. And he told them this story. He told them all the detail of the story. And then he realised, given their reaction, that it was probably worth writing a poem about. And there's just something really irksome about that. Just like, I don't know. It's just that thing of like centering the human, and then the human using the experience of using other stuff just to make a very pretty poem that makes the poet sound heroic, when really this is just like a shitty scenario. It's shitty for everyone. There's something about it.
Yeah. I mean, this, like, I never want to hear poets talk about writing their poems, at least if I like the poems, you know. I just don't, but I also don't think it has any real connection to it. Like, I assume most of the poets I like would have dumb things to say about most of the poems that they've written that I like.
Totally.
Yeah. So the as you pointed out, and as was confirmed in this conversation, this poem was used at Annapolis to train military officers' difficult decision-making skills. To me, this is not at all a poem about making a difficult decision. Like, I don't...
Why not?
Well, the doe is dead. The fawn is not dead yet, but can't survive. And the deer is potentially blocking the road. So I don't think what he does is nice and good, but I do sort of think that in the context of the poem as a whole, there's not really much other choice. Like, there's not really much else he can do, and this is probably, given what we know, the most responsible thing to do. Because otherwise he would what? He would leave it, let it die, and then possibly let it cause a wreck. He would manually kill the fawn, which seems sort of ghastly. It seems like this is sort of the, even if it's not like deterministically inevitable, it's hard to imagine there being another different, better, obvious thing. That this is sort of what a thoughtful person was going to have to do. Other than, like, unless he just wanted to withdraw himself and like pretend he hadn't been part of that situation.
Yeah.
Like, if he was honestly confronting it, then this was probably the thing to do. And I was guessing that they taught it at Annapolis not to instruct their charges and how to make, thoughtful, deliberative, in the moment decisions, but rather in order to help them accept that there was no choice to make, that they had to go ahead with what they had been told to do. Like Gandhi's favorite book, the Bhagavad Gita, translated by Amit Majumdar, is the totally bizarre argument of that book is like Arjuna saying, I'm the greatest archer in the world. Anybody I try to fire my arrow at will die. All of the people on the other side of the field are family members of mine. I don't want to kill them. I don't want to fight a war against my family, particularly knowing that I'm such a like God blessed warrior that I'm going to win and they're all going to be dead. And I don't want that. And so I would rather throw down my bow and arrow and not fight. And God literally comes to him in the form of his chariot driver and says, it's okay, kill all of them. I put you here on earth. The gods put you here on earth to kill motherfuckers. Go kill your family. And he says, thanks God, thanks Vishnu, or what is it? It's not Vishnu. It is Vishnu, but it's in the Krishna. He's in the incarnation of Krishna. He says, thank you, Krishna. I'm going to go kill my family now. And then that's the happy ending. And that feels a little bit like the military interpretation of this is like, go ahead and kill, like go ahead and push it over the edge. Like you don't really have a choice.
Yeah.
But I actually do find it to be an affecting poem. I just don't think about him lecturing his kids the next day or trying to tell documentary makers why the poem is important. I just find it to be touching and to ring true and to be very well put.
Yeah, I used to. It's just, it's something about the fact that he comes off as heroic.
Oh, does he? Do you find it do you think like the conclusion of the poem is meant to give him an aura of like a hard man who makes good times? To use that to invoke that weird meme.
That's the sense I get. Like, I did the hard thing, and now I'm gonna write a poem about it. And there's something about that fawn, which is like, just to get extremely like misty-eyed for a second. Like, the fawn is like alive in this poem the whole time. Like, she's still alive in the poem, and she's just living there, just being with this, with conversations like this going on.
Yeah.
I can't articulate it. It just irks me. I just don't like it. There's something about it. Maybe listeners can help me like unpack what it is that like pisses me off so much, because I don't know why I have this reaction now. I didn't used to. I used to think it was very clever and beautiful.
You know what actually is telling about what you said in that documentary about him talking to, is that I've never pushed a fucking deer off a cliff, but this is exactly the kind of thing you would not tell your children.
Yeah.
This is exactly the story I would tell them about all of the other things, and I would specifically not, and I might tell their mom after they went to bed, like, this sucked so bad. I had to fucking kill this deer. But like, you specifically don't tell your kids this story. Or at least I wouldn't,
Yeah, no, I thought that detail was gross. Not that I have any sense of what's appropriate or inappropriate to tell kids at the kitchen table in the morning, but
I don't know. I mean, maybe it even is but it just, I don't know. Like, I tend to be very squeamish about like restrictions on, like, I always wanted to read weird, violent stuff as a kid, and my parents were sort of, gave me some free rein, but also tried to prevent me from reading things that then, of course, I very easily found and read anyway. And then I would see like ridiculously violent, weird movies at friends' houses and things. And so like my inclination is always like, well, like she's even like my 8-year-old, like she's a thoughtful girl. Like, but then I was setting up this little Chromebook for her, and I had to go through and like approve the like restricting websites and things. And it was like graphic violence and like overt sexuality. Like, yeah, I think I'll go ahead and leave that off limits for now. Like, like, yeah, I don't know. Like, maybe the really wise thing would be if we were like those, like, Norse tribes where you just like everybody lives in the same hut and you like see your parents conceiving your brothers and sisters every night. Like, I don't know, man, but I'm gonna not tell my daughters about killing the fucking deer, the fucking pregnant deer. I mean, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I think it's a good poem, and I think it even, whether I should have these feelings about masculinity or not, it even gets at some of that sense of like what I, intuitively feel as a kind of a masculine duty.
Yeah, that you should be able to do.
Like, this is the large scale version of killing the spider.
Yeah. Yeah, like I'm never more, like Tom grew up on a farm and he has stories about the stuff that he just sort of had to do as a kid and as a teenager that I'm like, I couldn't have done that. Like, hit a roo coming home and it's not quite dead and you've got to take care of it. Kangaroo.
Oh, kangaroo. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And that's what is that in, I mean, have you ever been in proximity to one? Because I can't imagine how those things register as wild animals. Like, do they feel as like goofily cartoon human as they look in like depictions of them from a distance? Like,
they can be a little bit scary. Like a big male, if he stands up, because they hang out in groups, mobs, we call them.
And they get, like, they never stop growing, I read somewhere. Like, they get big.
What? Really?
Yeah, whether they, I think they die, and so they don't get that big. But like, if they live a long time, they don't naturally stop growing, is what I read.
Oh, that sounds like a drop bear type of myth. But
drop bear?
Australians will tell people from overseas that there's koalas and then there's drop bears, which just like they live in the trees and they drop onto you and like they just fucking kill you.
But they look like koalas?
I'm not sure what a drop bear's meant to look like.
I guess you never see one coming, so.
That's right, they just drop on you.
All right.
Yeah. No, kangaroos they're very pretty and like they're like big cats.
Okay.
But yeah, if a big male sees you coming and he can like stand right up on his hind legs and kind of like go to his full height and you're just like, oh fuck, I'm gonna get out of here.
Yeah. And they're pretty fast, right?
Yeah.
And they do their weird jumping run, but they're like fast.
They're really fast, yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions about Australian animals?
So to me, the Anne Sexton poem is more a poem about being a writer than about being a woman, right? Like, it's maybe specifically about how, of the things that won't satisfy you if you are a woman and a writer, that would be supposed to satisfy you if you were a woman and not a writer. But do you carry around any particular, I mean, it seems like you feel like a great sensitivity to your friends and peers and like aligning with social expectations in any given setting, but like you don't seem like you actually carry around much of a burden when it comes to femininity broadly.
I think I do more than I let on. And I think that, kind of coming back to what we were saying earlier, like I think that has been most present and painful for me when it comes to the motherhood thing. Yeah. Like I thought about that every waking minute of every day for a decade.
Yeah.
And what it would mean if I didn't do it, and what it would mean for me as a woman, how I would read in the world. Yeah, I really want to like do an episode just about this, but I'm not really sure how to tie it back to poetry.
Well, let me just ask you, like, how much of that, if you thought about that all the time for 10
all the
years?
Time. Yeah.
Because that was like, you'd say like 30-ish or what, like what late 20s?
I started thinking about it at about 28.
Okay.
And it only started to fade like about last year, really.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much of that like compulsive thought, or how much of that time was that? Because presumably in thinking about it, you thought about different possibilities, right? Like, I could do this, I could do that. This is what this might end up looking like. This is what that might end up looking like. So how much of that garden of forking paths was occupied with things like was occupied with the part of your life that is writing? Like, this would make it harder, this would make it easier, this would make it more, like, how much of how big a role did writing play in that set of permutations and possibilities and worries?
I don't think it played much of a role at all, actually. And
Really?
there are like, yeah, there's obviously like plenty of models of like writers
Both
who
and,
are also mothers, and like
Yeah,
they,
yeah,
you know, they seem to kind of make it work completely fine. So I don't think I ever saw it as like I won't be able to be, because I'm such a like lazy, you know, I don't, it's not like I get up at 6 every morning and like write and read poetry for 2 hours. Like, I sort of barely do it at all most of the time. So it's like I may as well have a 3-year-old, you know, for all the effort I give it. So yeah, no, that wasn't part of it. No.
Oh, I mean, that's kind of shocking to me, because as you said earlier, like, it's hard to identify what is more important in your life than writing.
Yeah, but I don't think I ever expected that.
You didn't think
No, I
having a child
suppose
would affect that, or not having a child would affect
no,
that?
no, I don't think so, because I think if anything, I sort of thought that might give me, like, I looked after my nephew once a week for a little over a year when he was sort of between 1.5 to 2.5, and I realized in doing that just how much time you have, just huge stretches of like blank time, but also like your mind's obviously on the baby. But I could imagine that I would get to a point where it's like, okay, well, baby's asleep, let's read something, let's write something. So yeah. And again, I could see models of women all over the place who had done it totally successfully. So
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess
it wasn't a choice between being a great poet and being a mother.
no, right. I mean, but like, it's just interesting to me that it didn't really factor in at all as
No,
a
because I mean,
variable.
yeah, there's way bigger stuff.
Well, like what? Because you said there's not bigger stuff. You said like that's the big thing, right?
Oh
I mean,
no,
presumably if
as
you
in
have a
like,
child, like that becomes the other big thing that's like you can't really compare them. But like if poetry is the big thing in your life, and you were thinking about having a different, incomparable, siloed off other giant big thing in your life, what were the other like mammoth elements that you were having to Tetris in there?
oh, what I mean by that is there were bigger factors that I was wrestling with in terms of the decision, such as what kind of mother would I be?
No, I mean, yeah, I would be interested to hear
Yeah.
more about that. Partly because I definitely thought for a long time I would not have kids, because it seemed like an obviously terrible idea. Hey, is that Tom?
Yeah.
Hey, Matthew. But then like having kids, I thought like, oh shit, oh well, like a shrug, like, oh, here we go.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, though. It's so different for men.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Although,
But
again,
not just, but not, I mean, but not just because of the enormous physical toll in the beginning. Like, you're talking about a larger, longer concern.
oh, I sort of also mean like in terms of you could decide now at 40. Like,
Oh, right,
I think
right.
I'll have
Yeah,
kids.
yeah.
Yeah. Whereas I felt particularly keenly that thing of like, not only do you have to decide, but you got to decide it now,
Right.
like today. And I can remember my older sister had her first baby at 36. And so when I had my 36th birthday, I was like, I'll know by then. It'll be fine. And I just spent the whole of my 36th birthday just like crying because I just still didn't know. Using up all my good content on you, bro.
No. Yeah. No, I'm just, yeah, and do you know this Sheila Heti book that was all about this?
Yeah, I did. I couldn't face reading it. I was like, that's great, Sheila. I'm not reading that book. She did a really good interview on Commonplace back when it was good.
Did your commonplace go bad?
Oh, totally. Yeah. That was so funny, though, in your email. Like, what has Rachel Zucker done for you lately?
No, I mean, I got stickers. And yours I have yours in an envelope. I just need to go to the mail, the post office and figure out how to send this. Oh, and I got your postcard.
Oh, sweet. Nice.
Which is great. And I like that poem. It reminded me of, there's a Anthony Hecht poem called Adam, which is his son's name. And it has because it's written from a distance because I guess his ex-wife, I don't know all the particulars, but his wife or his former wife left the country and took the child with her, and so he then went a long time without seeing him. But I reread it, and it has some really great stuff in it, including the title line of the book. It was in The Hard Hours, which is like a really amazing book. But it also, rereading it now, it's so self-centered,
right?
So because he talks about he says, Adam, there will be many hard hours, which is the line, the many a hard stundis from the old the Middle English poem. And he's talking about imagining your life in the future and what it'll be like, whether you're a kid or you're older. But throughout the poem, he keeps coming back to and then you're going to think about me and wonder about who this character is. He keeps coming back to me, and then the end is still, it's moving, but in the context of the whole poem, it starts to feel a little bit self-indulgent, where he says, I send these lines out to you, this song out to you. It shall reach you yet, is how it ends. But the whole thing is talk about your fucking son. I don't know, wonder about him. But it's all about your father's a fucking badass poet, and I bet you're gonna wonder about him, and I bet you're gonna. Don't worry, he's gonna be getting mad tail and having martinis and I don't know. It's just
I knew it.
How is it? I mean, I love Anthony Hecht. He has so many great poems, but it also it just seems why is this your framing for this fucking poem about your son?
Exactly. God damn it, Anthony Hecht.
Yeah, I mean, he was a presumptuous white man of that generation who, in his case, as with a number, he actually was really gifted. He just also was kind of a jackass.
Yeah, kind of knew it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, totally. I mean, yeah, definitely knew it and didn't. Yeah. Yeah. He just at least had the grace not to publish quite as much as Robert Lowell. That was my conversation with Alice. I hope you enjoyed it. If you are furious and can't wait to let me know how much, then please do write in to sleerickets@gmail.com. I await your righteous indignation. Thank you for listening. With any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.